In lesson 3, there we go, it's on now. We're in lesson 3 of 1 Samuel, so this is starting in chapter 4. This lesson covers chapter 4, verse 2, all the way through about the end of chapter 7, which is a lot of ground, but also not too terribly long ago, I preached a sermon series going over the events that happened here. So we should be somewhat familiar with these things already. This is the ark narrative as the people of Israel are losing the ark. So I want to hear a lot of what you have to say about this, and you can tell me what you think about these events as they're happening. So, chapter 4, the Israelites go out into battle against the Philistines. They have set up camp at Ebenezer. The Philistines have set up camp at Aphek. And what's the result of this first battle? Philistines win. And 4,000 Israelites die. This is a disaster. This has gone very poorly for them, and they immediately need to figure out how to solve this problem. The Philistines are a thorn in the side of the Israelites all throughout their history. They create a lot of problems, and at different times they are oppressing them and quite violent towards them. So what do they do in trying to gather together and to assess the situation? Gary.
Instead of saying God is not with us, they said the ark is not with us.
Yeah. So they say, why has the Lord defeated us? They do kind of pin this blame on God. God has defeated us. But then, there's more of a concern of, the ark is not with us. Now, the ark did not usually go into battle, and so it's not necessarily that, we just forgot to do this. So what's the rationale behind trying to get the ark into battle? Because think about, so you remember what was in the ark? What is the ark supposed to represent, and what is in it? What was that, Dave? Yeah. So it's God's presence on earth there. It's the mercy seat. It's this place where, inside they have Aaron's rod, and they have things like that. It's a very holy and sacred object. So why would you take something that valuable into battle? Yeah, Dave.
Well, in addition to that, he was signified he was with him. So taking the ark into battle signified that God was with him.
Okay. Yeah. So it's bringing God into battle with us and for us. Ida.
I realize that much.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, they're treating God like the rabbit's foot or a love charm. And if you take the ark, no matter what God thinks,
Mm-hmm.
then we'll be okay. And how many times, I don't know, how many times do they take the ark into battle? But anyways, to me, it's just like, well, if we have the ark, we can tell God what to do. And
Yes.
it would be very good.
I think you're correct, Ida. The difference here being that they've not prayed to God and asked for his help, asked for him to go into battle with them. They've simply despaired that God has defeated them. And they say, okay, well, God isn't going to defeat us if we literally bring him into battle with us or bring this sacred object into battle with us. Yes.
Well, it says in verse 3, I think, it will go with us. It
Yeah.
will save us. They're not attributing that to God. They're saying it will.
Yeah.
The ark itself will. They're not really giving God the
Yeah.
honor or attributing him the power of going into battle.
Yeah. They are treating this much more as a talisman, a weapon, a rabbit's foot, something like that. This sort of superstitious idea that, if we take this object into battle, that we are then harnessing the power of God. So there is some precedent for that, right? So when they went and attacked Jericho, how did Jericho fall? They marched around the city, and is the ark involved in that?
Yes.
Yeah, the ark went out first. Then it had its soldiers and priests accompanying them, but really it was God's message of, look, I'm going to give you this victory. We're going to send the Ark of the Covenant around Jericho these 7 days, and then the walls will come down and you will have victory. So there is some historical precedent for, okay, if we take the ark into battle, then God gives us victory. But you got to get your cause and effect right here, right? It's not that you get to use the ark as a weapon or as something to kind of lead God by the leash and say, okay, all right, God, go fight for us now. We've done this thing. It's that God had commanded them to do that then. And they don't necessarily bring the ark into battle all these other times. I don't think we read of that in any other incident since Jericho, if I'm remembering correctly. It at least wasn't common.
Well, they were still trying to do things their own way, according to their own wisdom, and not really
Yeah.
seeking the wisdom of God in what they were doing. It doesn't look like they prayed to God. They just, we're going to take this and we're going to be successful. So it's still trying to do things according to their, keep trying to work out their own salvation, and basically work out their own salvation.
Yeah. Right. They're definitely doing things their own way. They've not consulted God on any of this. They've not asked if there's something they need to do differently. If, some of the other times they've lost in battle, it's because there was sin in the camp, right? They've not asked God, what sin is causing this defeat among us. They've not asked God, be with us and go into battle for us and protect your people as you have promised. They don't say any of that. They just say, go get the magic box and bring it into battle. This is looking at God in more of a pagan way, that you can manipulate the supernatural to your own devices, to your own desires, do what you will with it.
Yes.
Dave?
That's reflected in what they said. It may save us.
Mhm.
It could let us win, basically.
Yeah.
Well, I know. Around, I know. Let's bring that thing with us. God may save us without even, like you said, talking with the Lord.
Yeah.
Will you save us? Can
Right.
you save us? Are you willing to save us?
Yeah.
They just, to me, well, I don't know, maybe it'll work.
Yeah.
You're right about the talisman thing.
Yeah.
Wrong approach.
It is absolutely the wrong approach. They've got all this mixed up as to what their role with God is, what the situation's supposed to be. To the point that was mentioned earlier in verse 3, when they say, let us bring the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord here from Shiloh, that it may come among us and save us from the power of our enemies. Some of the translations in the text say that he may come among us and save us. But part of why we have that as it is because they are depersonalizing God. That they are viewing God as a tool to be used, and then this ark, this box, by extension, as a tool to be used, rather than submitting to God. So we've got some big problems here. They're doing the pagan thing of trying to plunge your hands into the supernatural and to see if you can control this mighty flow of power. It's very superstitious, very self-centered, in that they're only viewing this as a tool or a weapon. So when they go and fetch the ark, who is accompanying it?
Sons of Eli.
Sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas. They have arrived. We already know that they're scoundrels. We know that they are not good priests and good men, and they offer no protest here. The Israelite soldiers and leaders say, we need the Ark of the Covenant to go into battle, and Hophni and Phinehas say, sounds good. See no problem with that whatsoever. There are no concerns here taking this sacred object that God has told us to make and to protect. No problem with sending that out onto the front lines of battle. Okay, so they do that. Now they have their super weapon. What happens in round 2 as they fight again?
Get defeated completely.
Yeah. It's worse this time. How many Israelites die the second time around? 30,000. So we went from 4,000 dying before to 30,000 dying this time. We're going the wrong direction here. We're not doing any better in battle. We're not succeeding or even coming closer to succeeding. It's not like, oh, the Ark of the Covenant helped, but it just wasn't enough to overcome the mighty Philistines. No, it got worse this time. You brought in another weapon, and God has shown his displeasure in that he gives you an even worse defeat at the hand of your enemies. And so they have lost 30,000 people. But is this the end that anybody expected? Even the Philistines.
Well, it is kind of interesting that the Philistines are familiar with the ark.
Yeah.
They know when the ark has come in, then they've said they brought their gods, not God, but
Yeah.
gods of the camp. So they've had this edge of, having that fear going into battle, and still managed to. Of course, they kind of said, if you don't fight like we never fought before, you're just going to be a
Yeah.
servant to this
Yeah.
way of life.
So they're steeling themselves for battle, but they are afraid because Israelite has brought their gods into battle, as the Philistines are saying. Why do the Philistines care about Israel's gods?
They've done a lot of damage coming into the promised land.
Right. So remember, the Philistines have no problem with believing that Yahweh is a god, but Israel has gods. They're superstitious and pagan people. So it's not, we believe in our gods, and our gods are the only ones who exist. They know Israel has gods. They probably can't really fathom the idea of there being only one God that a nation would have, so they're using the plural here. But they know Israel has gods. That to say that Israel doesn't have gods would be like saying, well, they don't have weapons. They don't have swords and spears. They don't have any, that would be silly. Of course, this opposing force has gods, and they've brought their gods into battle. And we know that their gods are mighty because look what they did in Egypt. Look what they did when Israel rolled into Canaan and destroyed a lot of cities and a lot of people. And now they're the dominant force in the region. They don't control every single corner of the land, but they do control the majority of it. So the Philistines are the thorn in Israel's side, but they also are intimidated by Israel because they know that they have some powerful tools and powerful gods at their disposal. And now Israel has brought out the trump card. They've brought their God into battle. This is a scary thing. So this is on par with, they've gotten reinforcements, more soldiers, more weapons, more something. This next battle is going to be harder. But to everybody's surprise, even the Philistines, the battle is not harder for them. They have just as much of a victory over Israel, in fact, even more. 30,000 people die, and the Philistines have this crushing victory. What else happens in this battle?
The ark is taken, the sons of Eli are killed.
Yeah. The ark is taken, the sons of Eli are killed. This is a grade A defeat for Israel. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. They have lost this sacred object. They have lost the priests who accompanied it. They have lost far more men than they expected to. It has gone really quite terribly. So starting like in verse 12, a man of Benjamin, a messenger, runs from the battle line. He gets all the way to Shiloh, runs all the way there in that same day. His clothes are torn, dirt is on his head. He's mourning, he's in great distress. And what does he tell Eli?
The ark is taken and his sons are dead.
Yeah, the ark is taken, your sons are dead. Now, Eli, to his credit, is nervous about the ark not remaining in Shiloh. He seems to not agree with the idea that we're going to take the ark into battle. He said that he was sitting on a seat by the road watching, which is sort of a funny thing to say for a man who's pretty blind by this point, but he's watching, and his heart trembled for the ark of God. He knows better than to think this is a good idea. I'm not sure if Hophni and Phinehas know better, but Eli does. And he is very uncomfortable with what is going on. But by this point, nobody's listening to the old blind man who's due to die at any moment. Hophni and Phinehas certainly aren't going to listen to their father. They haven't done it in years prior to this, so why would they start now? This ark is going to go into battle. So when the messenger comes and he tells Eli and he tells the rest of the city, what is it? Well, look at the order specifically that he says. In verse 17, Israel has fled before the Philistines. There has also been a great defeat among the people. Your 2 sons also, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark of God has been captured. That is a whole list of bad things. And hearing that your nation has suffered a terrible defeat and many of your countrymen are dead, that's not good. And there's uncertainty about what are the Philistines going to do next. Are they going to march on to Shiloh? Are they going to to go attack more cities? They'll be emboldened by this victory. Hearing that his sons are dead obviously would bring him great distress and sorrow. But it's not until he hears the ark of God has been captured that the shock actually hits. That's the thing that tips him over the edge, quite literally, both emotionally and physically, because the shock of hearing that the ark of God has been captured makes Eli fall backward from his seat by the side of the gate, and he breaks his neck and dies. It says the man was old and heavy, and that was enough to kill him. I don't think Eli was surprised that his sons died in battle. The man of God had already told Eli that his sons would die on the same day, and Eli can see that this is a bad thing that's happening here. We're doing something we shouldn't be. I think there's a part of him that probably expected that this was going to go poorly. But for it to go as far as the ark of God being captured is just too much. What do you think about that so far? Yeah.
It doesn't say anywhere that he was anxious about his sons. He was
It
anxious
doesn't.
about the ark.
Yeah.
Like you said, it seemed expected until he heard that the ark was captured. And then when you go on, I don't know if you want to go on any further, but even the daughter-in-law.
Yeah, it's the same thing.
Verb at the end says that the ark of God has been captured. It seemed to be her major concern as well as God had left.
Yeah. That makes me think a lot of different things, doesn't it, right? Because you get the same sort of thing going on with, this is Phinehas's wife, right? So she's pregnant. We might as well talk about it. This goes along with it. She's pregnant. She has heard the news. Her father-in-law is dead. Her husband is dead. Her brother-in-law is dead. And the ark of God has been captured. And you're right. Same thing here. She is upset more than anything about the ark of God being captured. And this is so much distress that she goes into labor over the stress of it. That is obviously something that can happen. And she has a hard labor here. She names the child Ichabod. Ichabod means no glory, or where is the glory? The glory of God has departed from Israel. And her primary concern here is that the Ark of God has been captured. I'm inclined to think that Phinehas' wife and Eli are more righteous than Hophni and Phinehas are, right?
Well, she's dying, as she says this.
And she's dying.
Statement, basically.
Yeah. So, well, there's lots we don't know about her, but in this, she has the reaction you would expect for a righteous person to have. I don't know if she was righteous necessarily, even if she had the false understanding of what the Ark of the Covenant was and believing that it was more of just this weapon they could use. That would still be a terrible thing to hear, but she at least sounds a little more like Eli in this than her husband, who was totally willing to just send it into battle. I don't know. He speculated a little bit because we just don't know that much about her. But there's a lot of sorrow that's going on here. Okay, Dave.
This is more of a comment than anything else. My opinion is they treated the ark now at this point like an idol. You take a statue with you, whatever.
Yeah.
You do that. It's going to take care of business, right?
Yeah.
I personally think she would have, the wife, may have understood the ramifications of that ark being captured.
Yeah.
Because that signified that God was with them,
Yeah.
and now he's not departed.
Right.
So that kind of leaves or indicates to me that it's a huge lesson for us. That we can't use God when we need him, and then we don't cast him aside when we don't. Oh God, for instance, oh God, if you just help me out in this financial situation, I'll do everything you want. And then when you get better, where's God at in your life?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that's this, but
No,
that's
but-
the kind of mentality where we already know from this text that these guys departed from God themselves.
Yeah.
They just did what they wanted to until they needed him. They drug him into battle, assuming, without consulting with him, that he was going to take care of it. So that's why I say, and some may disagree, right? Some, that's why I kind of think that they treated him like levels of an idol.
Yeah. It really is. And when we understand the way that the pagans looked at their gods, and then we compare what Israel's doing in this instance and many others, they're treating God more like these idols and more like these false gods than anything that we see in the covenant that God has given to them. Where do you get the idea in the covenant that God is a tool that they can pick up and set down as they need? Like, that's not any of the language that God uses. It's not that the tabernacle is the tool shed where we store God until we need him. That's not what that's supposed to be. But that's kind of what they've done with him. And this has gone very poorly for them as a result. Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, Mark, go ahead.
Well, not a lot has changed, has it? If you fast forward several thousand years, we have leadership that is corrupt, like these guys. And even their names, Hophni and Phinehas, one's a fighter, one has the tongue of a viper. And it just brings to mind that it's up to the other people who are being led by these guys to do something about it. They're not going to, if the guys who are in charge aren't doing something correct, it's up to everybody else to do something about it. I think in the Christian age, we have those instructions.
Yeah.
And they had instructions as well about the prophet isn't doing what they're supposed to do, this is what they need to do. They just weren't doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. There tend to be side effects when their relationship with God goes south and when they don't have that closeness and covenant bond with Him anymore that you used to have. Things are not good in Israel. And there are all sorts of ramifications. I can't be surprised that they lost in battle to the Philistines, that God wasn't with them. Aaron?
The Israelites intended to use the ark as a weapon.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, God does what He wants.
Yeah.
And so after the ark is taken, God says, okay, I will use the ark as a weapon.
Right.
It's kind of fun.
It is kind of there is kind of a twisted humor to it of it's very clear in this whole story that God has not been overpowered. It's not that the Philistines were so powerful but they were able to conquer Yahweh and conquer Israel because Israel is just so weak and has such an ineffective God. God has more than enough power and can make the presence of the ark a terrible thing to his enemies, and that's what this whole next section is going to be about. But it's the difference between trying to wield God like a weapon and appealing to God and asking for His help and submitting to Him.
Well, it's interesting how much power the Philistines attributed to the ark,
Mm-hmm.
not really understanding
Mhm.
the meaning of the ark or what it was
Yeah.
meant for. But they actually put it in the temple of their main god,
Yeah.
next to their main god.
Yeah.
So they understood it had power. Their main god, Dagon, was the god of fertile land. He's the main idol of the Philistines.
Mhm.
He was the god of the plow, said to be able to revive the dead.
Mhm.
So the Philistines had this idea, what had been taught by the prophets and through, from the
Yeah.
time of Adam and Eve, that there's a resurrection.
Yeah.
So they have all this understanding that even the Israelites don't seem to have.
Mhm.
So it's really interesting to me that they stuck that ark right next to Dagon.
Yeah, it is. They don't dump it into a ditch somewhere. Like they in some ways, they're valuing it more than Israel was, even if they still don't have a great understanding of what it really is. Yeah, there's all sorts of problems here. Ida?
Since we were talking about attitudes and consequences and how we're just like them, what Hophni and Phineas did is consistent throughout this whole thing. They were exploited.
Yep.
And they used others. They didn't care for others or honor them, but they used them for their own ends, and they ended up doing that to God. And I think we all have to be really careful about how we treat other people, because we will end up treating God.
Yeah. This story repeats a lot of times through the Bible, not in every detail, but in the attitudes of it, in the way that they're treating God and treating each other. This same sort of thing repeats throughout the Bible and repeats in modern time as well. And it would be a mistake for us to look back and to say, oh, the Israelites are so superstitious, and how could they possibly have such a terrible understanding of God? And miss the point that we can, in effect, do the same thing. Okay, maybe we are not as liable to view, a sacred box as some weapon to go use against our enemies, but can we depersonalize God? Can we treat God as a tool? The example Dave gave earlier of, hey, we ask God, we need help, help me through this financial difficulty, or help me through this problem in life, or help me because my loved one is sick, or whatever. And then when my problem is solved, drop God like a cordless drill that you don't need to use right now. God's not a cordless drill. God's not a spear to use against your enemy. God is not any of these things. He is a God that we have a covenant with, that we have a relationship with, and a God that we're to submit to. So let's talk about Dagon and what the Philistines do when they bring the ark. As we're mentioning, they've brought it into the temple of Dagon. This is their big main god. They've given it a place of renown in some ways, not in that they're elevating God or respecting God, but that they're putting this up as a trophy, right? Look at what Dagon has done for us. He has overcome Yahweh. He has overcome the gods of the Israelites. And so they put it here to show what they've been able to capture and what they've been able to defeat. But what happens in the temple of Dagon?
Dagon falls over.
Dagon falls over. That's a little embarrassing. Overnight, the Dagon falls over. Dave?
He didn't just fall over, he fell on his face.
Yes, fell on his face.
It's like prostrating himself before God.
Right. Huh. That's a little awkward. There's some weird symbolism there. Maybe, let's just hurry and pick him back up because that's a weird, coincidental, accidental kind of thing to happen. Wouldn't want anybody to see our God, prostrate before Israel's defeated God. Okay, well, maybe there was some sort of freak earthquake last night. Maybe there was some weird thing that happened. Never happened before, mind you, but maybe something weird happened this time. Well, what happens the next night?
Same thing. Only this time he loses his hands and his head.
Okay, yeah. So Dagon, once more, has fallen on his face before the ark, but this time his hands and his head are, and I want to be very clear about this wording, are cut off. The word is actually cut off. Not that they broke off, not that in the fall there was, a crack that made the head separate and the hands, got damaged. It says cut off. And the idea of cutting off the head and the hands was a symbol of a very dishonorable military defeat. This is what you did to a soldier that you had thoroughly defeated in battle and you wanted to dishonor. So God has defeated Dagon, has forced him prostrate before him, and has cut off his head and his hands to show that there is no honor in Dagon. Yeah, okay.
They were on the threshold. They weren't even still by the body.
Right.
They were on the threshold. So after that, the Philistines never stepped on the threshold.
Yeah. So the head and the hands are there on the threshold, which is a very, deliberate place for them to be. If they've fallen over, you would expect them to be kind of strewn about or lying right next, but no, they're sitting there on the threshold. And I don't know the exact layout and size of this place, but it's just weird. It's a weird situation there that shows more than an accident. And so, then they have this superstition that they carry forward. Ironically, they don't learn from this that Dagon is not a god that they should worship. What they learn from this is don't step on the threshold because that's where our god's head was for a while. And that's one of those as superstitions go. They probably even forgot all of why they did it. But it's, don't step on the threshold, jump over it when you enter the temple of Dagon. Dave?
I'm perplexed, maybe you can answer this. They obviously put him back together.
Yeah.
Must have dug out their super glue and put him back together.
Yeah.
So what was easier, to do that or to just realize God's here? Or
Yeah.
covenant is here. I'm just, that would be pretty, that's not coincidental first off, because we don't know how many years that thing's been standing each time.
Yeah.
There's no earthquakes, nothing like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they had guards around that temple, so
Yeah.
there's no way somebody snuck in with a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
So I'm just perplexed as to why they thought that was going to work.
Yeah. I'm perplexed as well. But what is probably going through their heads, especially adding in what happens along with this, of the hand of God being heavy on the city of Ashdod, wherever his temple is, and on the area around, is that they've come to the realization, okay, we defeated Yahweh in battle, so they say, but he is still powerful and he can still make our life difficult when we've taken his sacred object in. So we don't want that here anymore. So they're able maybe to look at this as, okay, we should show some respect for Israel's God, who obviously is very powerful and obviously doesn't want to be treated this way. Dagon is still stronger, mind you, because, we won in battle, and they're not going to give up on that idea. But maybe Dagon isn't strong enough to keep Yahweh here in this temple as a trophy. We won a battle, let's just call it good. We're not there to keep him in the temple. It's terrible reasoning. They're missing the point, obviously. But these are the sort of distorted things we do when we're trying to protect, a false god, and still come face to face with the reality of what's happening here. Ashdod, things are going poorly for them, not just in the temple. So to continue with this idea that this is not a coincidence, you had 2 nights where Dagon has fallen over with escalating consequences, and throughout the city and all around, the hand of God is heavy against them. How does that show itself? Excuse me? I heard somebody. Tumors. Thank you. Sorry. Yes, tumors all on people all around. That's a problem. And they don't like the affliction that they have there. They say the ark of the God of Israel must not remain with us, for his hand is hard against us and against Dagon, our God. And so they're trying to decide what to do with it. What do they come up with as a viable plan? Move him. Send him down the road. It doesn't matter where he goes as long as he's not here. It doesn't matter where the ark goes as long as it's not in our city. So very much the not in my backyard syndrome.
It's kind of interesting that they recognize and realize that it's stronger than their main God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they're seeing this as a struggle between Dagon and Yahweh. The two are locked in combat, and Dagon was able to help them win on the field of battle, but it's too much to try to keep Yahweh here in this city. So let's not do that. Maybe down the road things will go better, or it's their problem now. It doesn't matter because we're sending Yahweh and his sacred box away from us. Mind you, this is all bad reasoning, but this is just the reasoning they have. Okay, so they send the ark down the road over to Gath. This is one of the other main cities of the Philistines. Yes, Ida.
I just think it's funny that they don't send it away.
Yeah.
Send it to a city in their own coalition.
Right. Yeah. I think they're trying to hold on to it as the idea of a trophy, maybe, as the idea of keeping it. We don't want to send it back to Israel just yet because we've captured this. This is our spoil of war. This is our prisoner, our loot. So don't send it back to them. We just have to find a way to be able to contain it, right? And more importantly, there's the desperation of just get it out of here and send it somewhere else. Off to Gath it goes.
Kind of like surely it can't do as much damage in Gath as it's in here.
Right, yeah. Maybe they'll have some idea. Maybe Dagon will be more effective there, or another god will be a little stronger in that area. Remember, they saw a lot of connection between the power of a god in a certain location, a certain area of land. And so, okay, maybe Yahweh will be a little weaker, farther from Shiloh, farther away, and we're getting kind of deeper into to our land. Our gods will have a little bit more power here. There's all sorts of twisted reasoning they can use to try to make this work, and it's just not going to work out very well for them. So they continue on. It gets to Gath. What happens in Gath? More tumors. Yay. So, more tumors, more panic. There's great panic in the city. And this is, affecting people young and old all throughout. And so, what is the solution that they have to solve this problem? Send it down the road. Keep going. Just get it out of here. We don't want it in our town. So it goes on to Ekron. What happens right when it gets into Ekron? What happens?
People of Ekron don't like that.
Yeah, turns out they've heard what's going on.
They don't want to die from
Yeah.
their land.
So they are already quite fearful. They're saying, why would you send that to us? Do you hate us? This has done such terrible damage in what was the city where Dagon's temple was? Ashdod, thank you. I just lost it for a sec. Ashdod and Gath, and now you've sent it off to Ekron. Like, why? Don't send it to us. What do you think we're going to do with it that you weren't able to do with it? And so, even as it's just crossing into the city, they are already making plans to get it out. They aren't even really going to attempt anything. But does that stop God from, putting his hand heavy on them? No. Even though they are not trying to keep it, still, verse 11, there was a deathly panic. The hand of God was very heavy there. Verse 12, the men who did not die were struck with tumors. The cry of a city went up to heaven. So, problems. More and more problems. Yeah.
Well, I mentioned mice, and it's the first time they mentioned mice is later on.
Mhm.
Some of the history says that the ships brought these mice, and mice were running through the land, and what they were spreading was possibly something similar to the bubonic plague or the bubonic plague
Yeah.
itself. And so, because I couldn't understand why they would make images of mice.
Mhm.
They said the mice was what really was causing the terror in the land as far as they were bringing sickness in the land.
Yeah. Yeah, so, okay, this brings up an interesting thought. If we have something coming as a result of mice, let's come up with this naturalistic explanation. Mice have come in, have brought some sort of plague like that, or things, it being spread. You have people who are taking an ark from one city to another and passing a disease. Does that make sense? Could that work in a scientific way?
Well, I don't, they still attributed, and they're saying God wouldn't use a natural means of spreading disease on these people. It says he's afflicting them.
Mhm.
They recognize he's afflicting them.
Mhm.
That's why they keep trying to, everywhere the ark goes, whatever its plague is, follows them.
Yeah.
Follows it wherever it goes. So I don't think that you could really call it something that's not supernatural. It seems this is God's hand on them, and
Yeah.
they recognize it.
Yeah.
They did attribute a lot of things that were natural to, their gods.
Sure.
Mythology goes through all of that, and how they twisted what was truth into whatever they wanted to believe.
Yeah.
They seem to understand this is because the ark is there.
Yeah.
They're not blaming it on just a natural occurrence.
No, they are not. They absolutely believe that it's God doing this.
I don't think even we can do that because
Yeah.
there wasn't this problem until they had the ark in the land.
Right. I totally agree, and I have no problem attributing this to God and totally believe that this is God's hand heavy upon them. There is a certain trend that happens a lot with certain interpreters of the Bible in trying to come up with naturalistic explanations that take the miracles out of the Bible and take the supernatural out of the Bible. And part of what can make that difficult is sometimes the things that God uses are things that can happen naturally. So you think about some of the plagues that struck Egypt. Hail, fire from heaven as lightning. Like, have there ever been bad hailstorms before? Sure. Could it be a really, really bad hailstorm? Sure. I mean, you say these things don't happen often, but over the course of history, like, they happen sometimes, right? So God can use things like that. God can spread things, can bring a judgment using a process of nature, a process of the earth, and still be from the hand of God.
Well, even Miriam's punishment, leprosy was natural.
Yeah.
Getting leprosy while you're standing in front of your brother is probably not.
Right.
But it is a natural thing that God used to punish Miriam. It's not, lightning didn't come down and strike her, but God came and struck her.
Right. Okay. Mark.
Yeah, Jesus proved that the laws of nature are made by him,
Yes.
and that they obey him.
Yes.
To do whatever he says. And this is just another case of, we see the same level of thinking between the Israelites and their enemies, that gods are these entities to be manipulated, and you leverage things against them, you give them things and they give you things.
Yeah.
And God is just teaching everybody a lesson here. No, not right.
Yeah.
Not good.
I think sometimes we have a problem with saying, okay, if God's going to work a miracle, like it needs to come down from heaven and have nothing to do with any of the natural processes. They need to be struck by spontaneous tumors that have nothing to do with anything else. And say that if it's, a virus or a parasite or an infection that is spreading, that it can't possibly be from God. The laws of nature are God's to use. And God is certainly capable of taking these things, if that's the way he did it. I don't even know, but that's the way that he did it necessarily here. This may have just happened spontaneously with nothing that we know of the public health things or anything like that. But even if we come up with the idea that, okay, it's these mice that are spreading the disease among them, or it's the people who are carrying the ark who, as they get to the town to give it there, they are then passing it on to those people and a disease is spreading. None of that undoes what Scripture says, that God is striking these people. God has issued a judgment against them for their sin, and they're being judged place to place where the ark is going. Later on, next week, you'll see how they even do a test to see if this is coincidental. Because even though they are attributing this to Yahweh, there's still a part of them that goes, maybe this is a coincidence. Maybe we've just gotten really unlucky and these bad things are happening to us. And so they put God to the test in a sense of, let's let God direct the ark back, putting it in this cart with the milk cows who are going to take it back in this kind of absurd way. And it's confirmed for them. This is not a coincidence. So just don't be afraid of that when you see the attempts to try to come up with naturalistic explanations. The answer many times is God uses the laws of nature as he wills. And then also God breaks the laws of nature as he wills because they are his to use and to break. Neither of those disprove anything about God or his work. Okay, thank you, everyone. Next week, we start in chapter 6, where it is in Ekron, and they're trying to figure out how to get it back to Israel. It'll be chapter 6 and probably 7 as well. I won't be here, so Scott will be teaching class. Thank you.